Devastating strikes conducted by the United States in Iraq. Israel and militants in Gaza are striking at each other again. And all this as the president kicks off a 2-week-long vacation. Plus, Ebola rumors are spreading fast and furious via social media. And has an innocent man been put to death in the United States? I'm Michael Smerconish. Let's get started. My first headline is from ABC News. Airstrikes undertaken as U.S. re-engages in Iraq. Some 3 years ago, President Obama ended America's combat role in Iraq amid cries from many detractors that the job wasn't finished and he'd find himself dealing with it later. Well, later turns out to be now, with the U.S. having launched airstrikes Friday against the brazen and well-armed Islamic terror group ISIS. ISIS has marauded through northern Iraq after spilling in from Syria, seizing towns and sending Iraqi troops into panicked retreat. They've executed opponents and forced several 100,000 Iraqis to flee their own homes in fear. The U.S. says it had to do something. The plan going forward? TBD, to be determined. With me live from Orlando, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, U.S. Army retired. General Hertling spent nearly 4 years of his life in Iraq. And from Washington, Tom Rogan, columnist for the National Review and the Daily Telegraph of London. General, allow me to show you, Jess, if you put that up on the screen, something that Senator Dianne Feinstein said just yesterday with regard to the situation in Iraq. She said, it takes an army to defeat an army. And I believe that we either confront ISIL now or we will be forced to deal with an even stronger enemy in the future. Is she right, General?
Partly. It certainly takes an army to defeat an army. But I'm not sure our army is the right one to do this now. And I think the president's strategy of contributing a little bit and doing the assessment, as he has done for over a month now with the limited number of advisors in Iraq, is a good move. But it's got to be the Iraqi army that does this. It has been the Peshmerga that's been fighting very hard recently. The rest of the Iraqi army has to get involved. We used to have an expression, Michael, when we were there, is they have got to want it more than we do. And until that time comes, we're going to have some challenges with a growing terrorist threat within Iraq. But it's not our problem. It's Mr. Maliki and the Iraqi government's problem.
And I certainly understand your point. I'm also wondering from the sidelines, where is the UN and where is the European community in all of this, General?
It's a very good question, Michael, and I think especially when you're talking about the northern part of Iraq, because there are certainly threats to Turkey. There are certainly threats to the rest of the European Union as some of these terrorists become more and more emboldened as they potentially pass through. As you know, my last job was in Europe, and we were beginning to see some of the terrorist movements pass through the Schengen zone, places where you just need a European passport. So this is critical, and I think we have to get the UN involved, and we have to get the European Union involved, and the Gulf Cooperation Council as well.
Tom Rogan, even if 40,000 Yazidis are evacuated, that won't alleviate the bigger picture problem with ISIS.
No, it won't, and that's why I think what we need to see here is a more comprehensive campaign. I completely understand and in many ways agree with General Hertling in the sense that over the long term, this definitely requires an Iraqi solution, both an Iraqi political solution and a military solution. But in the short term, what we're going to need to see is the degrading of ISIS. And specifically, I think what US air power can do is to limit their maneuverability, limit their ability to move convoys very quickly against formations of, Kurdish fighters or Iraqi army units. But in the short term, there is an urgent threat, and only the United States can deal with it. And just going back to what we were talking about with the UN and EU, the sad reality of this, the RAF, Britain, America's closest ally, is only sending one plane. It is America alone, and that is a real tragedy. But the European Union, you speak to British intelligence people, they will be very open about their concern of ISIS, European members of ISIS coming back and then using their passports to potentially even travel to the United States for terrorism.
General Hertling, the president sat down for nearly an hour with Tom Friedman from the New York Times yesterday, and he said that there's really a twofold analysis now that he brings to situations like this. One is, should we intervene? And equally important, do we have an answer the day after? Isn't that the big picture problem? We intervene now, but then, to use the old Colin Powell comment, we've broken it and we own it. What do we then do going forward?
Well, first, Michael, I think Tom Friedman's article was an excellent piece. It showed just the complexity that the president and his national security team are dealing with in this area. We had over 100,000 plus soldiers in Iraq at one time. We had a very large Air Force. So the question is, how do you intervene? I think the mission that General Austin, as the Central Command Commander, has right now is a good one. It has certain constraints and restraints on it, but he is executing that mission very well. And I think even the very limited tactical strikes that occurred yesterday that are being made such a big deal of today at least gave a little bit of emphasis toward the Kurdish partners, and they are certainly a great partner of ours, not an ally but a partner as part of Iraq. But it gave them a psychological push, if you will, by saying, hey, they will help. They will prevent people from coming into Erbil and perhaps threatening the American presence there. The same thing may be true of Baghdad, but as Mr. Freeman's piece pointed out, we cannot become Iraq's Air Force and allow Mr. Maliki to get off the hook. They've got to establish a better government and provide security for their own people.
Tom Rogan, I like to say that my real job is to answer phones for a living, because by day I host a radio program and I hear from people all across the country on a variety of matters. My sense of the American pulse is that people don't wish to see us re-engage in Iraq. They don't want anything more than the humanitarian effort that's now underway.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's incumbent upon people like myself who believe that we should be more involved to say why. And in specific terms, the argument is that what we have seen over the past couple of years with our isolation, both from Syria and Iraq, is this developing situation on the ground now. Humanitarian catastrophe, terrorism spreading westwards in very significant, tangible ways. And that if we don't take a different step, as the president is beginning to do, although I'd like to see him do more, what we will see is continuing destabilization and also the spread across the Middle East of these currents of political sectarianism, overwhelming dialogue. I mean, one of the great successes of the U.S. military in Iraq, which General Hertling was very much part of, was the role of U.S. military leadership and diplomats in actually serving interlocutor relationships in Iraq. And, you know, our absence from Iraq has, I think, caused, or has not caused, but has facilitated some of these problems. And I wish we'd just kept some more people at the embassy and maintained those relationships, both in terms of intelligence, logistics, but also political relationships.
Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, thank you as always. Tom Rogan, we appreciate your perspective. You remember that original headline, airstrikes undertaken as U.S. re-engages in Iraq? What I would have written, Sinjar's solution won't stop ISIS. So, how's this for timing? As the commander-in-chief starts his break in Martha's Vineyard today, bombings, beheadings, barbarism tear across the Middle East, plus this.
I am declaring the current outbreak of Ebola virus disease a public health emergency of international concern.
There are rumors and there are truths about the virus.